Just as in the body, acute stress leads to a change in the allocation of resources in the brain as well. In particular, resources, or glucose in this case, are reallocated towards the amygdala, our threat detector, and also towards a region of the brain referred to as the hippocampus, which is involved in memory formation. Now, in fact, the simultaneous activation of the amygdala and the hippocampus, which you can see are actually quite close together in the brain, is what leads us to have improved memory for fearful events. Now, this is actually quite adaptive much of the time. Imagine that you're going through the forest and you find a mushroom and you decide to eat the mushroom and it's a poisonous mushroom and you get very sick and you decide immediately to, and remember forever, never to eat that kind of mushroom again. Similarly, imagine that you're in a car accident because you were on your cell phone, and that the simultaneous activation of the amygdala and the hippocampus at that moment of the car accident stress is what will stamp in that memory forever and probably, or at least hopefully, lead you to never be on your cell phone again. And so this is a very adaptive response, particularly when we're trying to avoid physical threat. However, as we've learned and many times in this course already, our stress systems activate to all kinds of non-physical threat as well. And in those situations, this response is somewhat less adaptive. For instance, imagine that you take a test and you do very badly on that test. And when you get your grade back, it's very stressful and that memory gets stamped in. And as a result, you decide to drop out of school to never take any tests again. And because you decide you just can't hack it. And every time that a test comes up, that memory comes up and you avoid the test. Obviously less adaptive. And so while this is an adaptive response for physically threatening situations, the response also requires some maintenance and monitoring, some regulation. And that's where our prefrontal cortex comes in. Now, we've referred to the prefrontal cortex before as being involved in thinking, reasoning, decision-making. Another role of the prefrontal cortex is to try to keep the amygdala, the hippocampus, and all of these other what's referred to as limbic system structures in check. Now, the analogy that I like to use, which is actually quite similar to the one that Tim Box used in his TED Talk with the crew and the captain, is I like to refer to all of these limbic system structures as crying babies. And so the amygdala is crying, fear this, oh, I see something scary. Oh, pay attention to me, I see something scary. And the hippocampus is saying, ooh, I have a memory, I have a good memory, pay attention to me. And there are other structures as well. There's the nucleus accumbens, for instance, which is involved in the processing of reward. And it's going, ooh, I see something good. Ooh, this will be rewarding. Ooh, this will feel good. Ooh, this will taste good. Listen to me. And all these babies are vying for attention. And in this analogy, the prefrontal cortex is the parent. It's parent prefrontal. And its role as parent is to manage all of these crying babies. It needs to figure out who to soothe, who to attend to, and who to kind of shut up. Because sometimes these crying babies just shouldn't be listened to. Now, this analogy is actually very similar to Tim Box's analogy, but I find the additional characterization of these limbic system responses as crying and immature is somewhat helpful. However, just like in Tim Box's analogy, where he talks about the crew as the voices inside your head, you can think of these crying babies as the voices, the narrative, the running narrative inside your head. And so these voices are going at all times. They're going, ooh, do you want a piece of cake? Ooh, are you sure you're good enough? Ooh, do you think you can handle this test? Oh my God, there's a test coming up. Ooh, maybe you should be anxious. Ooh, well, there's something shiny. Ooh, that looks good. Oh, remember this memory? And on and on and on and on. And the role of parent prefrontal is to figure out which of these narratives needs to be listened to, when they need to be listened to, and when they need to be regulated, because these limbic system responses are immature. And they don't know how to respond. They only know to detect threat, always. But they don't know when it's actually dangerous and when it's not. And that's the role of the prefrontal cortex, is to help train, to help manage. The thing is, stress can have a really unpredictable effect on the prefrontal cortex. Too much or too little stress can reduce the efficiency and effectiveness of the prefrontal cortex to manage these limbic system structures. In addition, the way we view the stress seems to matter a lot. So, if we believe that we can handle the stress, if in appraisal terms we view the stress as a challenge and we believe we have the resources available to be able to cope with that challenge, then we often, the prefrontal cortex activity often gives us an increase in focus, a sharpening of wit, an efficiency of decision making, and a calmness that allows us to soothe the limbic system structures down in an effective manner. If, on the other hand, we don't believe we can handle the stress in appraisal terms, if we view the stress as a threat, or we don't believe we have the resources available to be able to cope with that threat, then we may see an inefficiency of prefrontal cortex activity, which allows the inner voices to rise up and threaten us and panic us, and leads to a maladaptive stress response. And so you can see how these appraisals matter so much in terms of how not just our mind, but also our body and our physiology deals with a stressful situation. And so that further indicates just how important it is that we find ways to view stressful events as challenges instead of threats.